A huge welcome to everyone. It's so lovely to see you here tonight, celebrating the publication of this book, Keep Your Hair On, Understanding Urges to Pickle Bite, which was published on the 2nd of April by our very wonderful Clare Mackay. So well done. So we have 2 hours here this evening, so that gives us plenty of time to be able to hear a reading from the book. I'm going to ask Claire some questions, but there'll also be time for you to ask questions. So do have a think if there are particular things that you would like to ask her, because we've got plenty of time for that. And then in the second hour, we will have some drinks and nibbles downstairs, so it's great that the weather's so lovely. And then there's an opportunity for you to buy Claire's book if you'd like to and have it signed. Exactly, which is lovely. So, so that's how it's going to go this evening. So as you all know, Claire is a well-respected neuroscientist with over 30 years spent studying the human brain, and now she can add an acclaimed author to her kind of credits. It's so lovely to have this opportunity to celebrate. In terms of kind of our relationship together, Claire reached out to me after a conversation with a colleague, now nearly sort of 3 years ago or so, where we met and chatted, and Claire talked about her 3-decade experience of living with hair pulling, like skin picking and nail biting as a body-focused repetitive behaviour, or BFRB. And I come from a background as a clinical psychologist, studying teenagers and working with them, teenagers with anxiety and OCD and related difficulties. So Claire and I could immediately see lots of common ground for us to work together to really try and advance our understanding, and also to advance treatments for this area which is so misunderstood and neglected as a sort of research area, despite actually it being very common, particularly often kind of starting in those teenage years. And over the last 2 or 3 years, we've been really lucky because we've had the most fantastic research students that we've been able to work with to already really kind of move the field on. So we've had Talia Myson, Laura Lee, who's here this evening, Daisy Cutting, who's also here this evening, Louisa Cotzi, helped by our DPhil student Lottie Ship, and we're also doing this evening by 2 of our new students, Amber and Essin. So it's really exciting that already we've been able to really start to make a difference, which is wonderful. And so there's the sort of research to one side, but on the other side, another sort of hat that I wear is I edit a book series for common mental health difficulties in young people, so it's a self-help book series. And one of the things that's always struck me about Claire, and I'm sure it will have struck you too, is just how articulate and how thoughtful you are, and how you do this most amazing job of bringing kind of scientific understanding together with that kind of personal experience. And so it struck me how wonderful that would be to see that in a format like this, so to see it as a book. So I then spoke to our book editor, Andrew Immaculate at Little Brown, and as soon as I talked to him about it, he was like absolutely convinced, reached out to Claire straight away, and here we are a year later celebrating all this hard work as we can see the book published, which is really exciting. And so it got published on the 2nd of April, so only a few weeks ago, but already there are reviews on Amazon. I don't know if you've looked at your Amazon reviews. Yeah. The 2 reviews are both 5-star, and let me tell you what they say. They say, absolutely brilliant. Get your mitts on Clare Mackay's book. Just finished the audiobook narrated by Professor Mackay. The role of trance states, self-regulation, sensory processing, and shame and stigma in BFRBs is so interesting. Prof Mackay is a scientific heavyweight who exudes compassion, lived experience, and positivity. And I really couldn't agree more. This book is so beautifully written. Claire really does have this rare ability to bring kind of scientific understanding and make it accessible and understandable and deeply human. And that really is incredibly rare. And I think through this book, she's really shining a spotlight in an area that is so often misunderstood and so often hidden. And I think people with lived experience are going to really take this book and they're going to feel seen, and they're going to feel understood, and they're going to feel less alone, and that is so important. And so I think tonight we're not just celebrating a book, we're celebrating a voice that brings a huge amount of compassion, that really helps to reduce shame and stigma, and really helps to increase understanding in an area where all those things are so badly needed. So a huge warm welcome to Clare.
And now after that,
I've done it.
Yeah, you've really done me in there. And now I'm going to read without. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And Polly forgot to introduce herself. This is
Yes, I did.
Polly Waite, Professor Polly Waite, who is the new Deputy Director for the Centre for Emerging Minds. So, and I've had lots of amazing conversations with lots of amazing people over the last 3 years, and the best ones of all are like the ones I had with Polly, where you talk about this experience, you talk about this phenomenon, and then you immediately go, ooh, I can do something with that. So that's,
So
there's lots of stories like that in the book.
Exactly.
That was very much how we started.
Yeah, it's hard to keep our meetings to an hour, isn't
It really is. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit, now that I've had a chance for my voice to come. I'm going to start right from the beginning. My fingers have worked their way into the danger zone, and I've found an anomalous hair. I must put these hands down and concentrate on the book I'm reading. I am not going to pull out that hair. It needs to stay where it is. Oh, the hands are up again and agitating at the hair. The follicle is now tingling with the feeling that that hair needs to come out, but I'm still fighting it. I don't want to pull it. It's been growing nicely, and I don't want to ruin the good work. I try more distraction. I'm doing everything I can to stop myself pulling this hair, but the attraction is too great. 10 seconds after deliberately dragging my hands away, they're back, agitating at the hair. And now I know I'm not going to be able to concentrate on anything else until I pulled out that hair. So maybe I should just allow myself that one, just that one, then I can get on with my day. I don't have any tweezers close by, so I'm going to have to use my bitten fingernails, which are not a precise tool. No, we know where this leads. It's a really bad idea to start. But now I can't not. The need to pull out that hair is occupying my entire consciousness, and I need to get it over with. The first attempt yields a hair, but it's not the right one. The anomalous one is still there, screaming louder than ever. Try again, another miss. And again, but the one I'm after is thicker and trickier than the soft ones around it, so more good hairs continue to fall victim. Eventually I get a good hold on the hair in question, and out it comes with a strong feeling of relief and satisfaction. I inspect it for a second and then discard it. And now comes the dreaded shame feeling. I failed yet again to overcome the urge to pull. And I didn't just pull one hair, I pulled a few from a patch which now looks a bit wonky and bald and is still tingling with the urge to pull. So now my fingers are searching for any hairs that can be pulled to tidy up the wonky patch. And before long, another target hair has been identified, and now we're right back at the beginning, and I'm trying to resist the temptation all over again. But I have a horrible feeling of inevitability. This swarm of urges will keep me in its grip until it chooses to let me go, and then I'll have to deal with the consequences. I start to wonder how I'm going to hide what I've done and do a mental survey of where my nearest eyeliner is and whether I'm likely to be able to get to it without anyone seeing me. Since I was around 12 years old, some version of the above has been my constant companion. On several days in any given month, I have experienced powerful urges, fought to resist, and usually failed. This left me with a bald patch on the crown of my head, missing eyebrows and eyelashes, and an intense, deep shame. Despite being fortunate to have many of the trappings of success, good general health, loving husband, the joy of motherhood, that's going to make me cry. That's the one that's going to make me cry. A nice house, a good career, great friends. I've always harboured a strong sense of being fundamentally flawed because I cannot resist the urge to pull out my hair. A combination of hitting the wall in a busy job, menopause and COVID forced me to pause. I had some good therapy, and started to learn the powerful skill of self-compassion. Compassion helped me to pull back the lead-lined curtain of shame that had cloaked my natural curiosity. I'm a professor of neuroscience and have been fascinated by the human brain for as long as I can remember, and yet it's only now that I'm able to start my journey of discovery into the little-known and widely misunderstood set of conditions called body-focused repetitive behaviours, or BFRBs, of which trichotillomania, or hair-pulling disorder, is one. This book describes the first leg of that journey. I have visited many corners of the globe of the human condition, from psychology and psychiatry, through cognitive and molecular neuroscience, to social science, anthropology, and hair and skin science. I have had some incredible conversations with experts in the field, some of whom are in the room, as well as hair and beauty professionals and many members of the BFRB community. I have been amazed and thrilled at the number and variety of stones there are to upturn, and how this contrasts with the misguided sense that individuals who experience uncontrollable urges to pick, pull, or bite at themselves are faulty. What I have learned so far is that the answer to the question, why can't I stop pulling out my hair, is complicated, but that the answer is very definitely not that I am fundamentally faulty, broken, or flawed.
Thank you so much, and well done for getting through that. It's so lovely to hear a reading, and I guess you've kind of touched on this already, but I wonder, for people that really have no understanding or experience of BFRBs, how do you help explain, beyond, kind of giving those descriptions, how do you help explain it to them?
So I guess I've got two things that I like to use to help people understand. The first is a mosquito bite. So I'm going to start talking about itching and scratching, so you're all going to start going like this. But you know the feeling of there being something on you that's itchy, like a mosquito bite. And you're trying really hard to resist the temptation to scratch it, because you know that if you scratch it, it's just going to make it worse. And that feeling, the insistence of that feeling is very familiar to me when I have those urges to pull out my hair. It just won't leave you alone. It's and as I described there, it sort of captures your attention and your consciousness, and you very strongly have the sense, I'm just going to have to do this, or else I'm not going to be able to move on with my day. So that gives you a feeling of the insistence of that feeling. But the other thing that I think helps people to understand is that when you're in an episode of picking, pulling, biting, many of us who experience this kind of go into a bit of a trance-like state. We call it the trance-like state. So kind of a feeling of dissociation, and you're kind of here but not here. And that feeling, again, may sound a bit strange, except we all experience that feeling, because it's the feeling we all get when we're sitting on the sofa scrolling, or there's all sorts of things that we might be doing that zone us out. It's kind of a zoned out feeling. It's actually not an unpleasant feeling, that feeling of, in fact, it's quite a tracking feeling, the feeling of, you should get up, there are other things you need to be doing, and yet still you're just sitting here doing this thing that you should get on with. And so those are the two ways that I try to help.
And I think everyone can relate to that completely. And so you lived with it for four decades exactly, without disclosing it to anyone. And here you are, a few years later. And I would love you to talk a little bit about that process of deciding to start to open up and talk to people about it, and that process of becoming a lived experience researcher.
Yeah, thanks. It's of course, it's a journey. It's a process, and given that this is the first time I've done this feels like another step along it. So those who are looking carefully can see I'm a little twitchy. But the process of opening up felt like it took kind of decades, and yet, of course, the day when I made the decision, when the kind of all of the pieces came together, and I decided I was going to do it. So anyone else who's looking on it seemed fairly sudden. I'm also aware that some of my good old friends are in the room, and they were the ones that did know. so for some people in the room, this wasn't a secret that they didn't know about. For some people, that it was a thing that they knew about me, but they also knew it as a thing we don't talk about. We don't talk about it. We don't go there. But for everybody else, it seemed like it was a sudden decision to do it. But of course, it was something that took lots of little individual steps and lots of kind of gaining the confidence and gaining the momentum. But the first conversations I had were really scary. The first professional, the first times I said it in a professional capacity, I shook and cried, a bit like I'm doing right now. But of course, it gets easier. The more you do it, the easier it gets. But that process of disclosure, because that's what anybody who brings their lived experience into work goes through a process of disclosure, and it is a huge deal. And I always want to pay sort of tribute to people who do it. And I'm very conscious that I was able to disclose this deep dark secret about myself only when I became secure. I was secure in myself, in my family, in my work, it was only possible for me to disclose when I felt like I was going to be all right. And so I always feel that it's important to say that it's also okay not to disclose. Yeah. And that, when it felt right, but it certainly didn't feel right for all the decades before that.
Yeah, yeah. But then within months, you're on Women's Hour.
Within
less than a month. I love how you took that and ran with it. Yeah, amazing. So tell us a little bit about the process of writing this book.
Yeah. Well, the process of writing the book was a complete surprise. You've kindly already set the scene for how it happened. So Polly was working her magic behind the scenes. The first thing I knew was that the editor got in touch and said, "Have you ever thought about writing a book?" And for about 10 minutes, I'd been thinking, "Oh, no, I could write a book." But actually, as soon as the question was asked, I realised I had one in me. I had a story to tell, and that I was keen to tell it. But the thing that was a surprise is how easy it was. I've never found writing particularly easy. I've never been in academic writing. It's always been a struggle, and I think I now know why. Academic writing is formulaic. It's a straitjacket, and it has rejection built into it. Whereas writing this book was just being able to speak, but putting it down in words on the keyboard. And I found it just flowed out. And so once I started, it was actually a real joy. And of course, doing the research for it was also a joy. And I've already talked about some of those conversations that I had with people that end up being little snippets in the book, and the way that you sort of start to put the pieces together. And so, yeah, I actually really enjoyed it. I would quite like, I've got a title for the next book, but I haven't got any content yet. This one's keep your hair on, the next one's let your hair down.
Did you go away and kind of lock yourself up somewhere to do it, or did you get in dribs and drabs over?
Yeah, but proper writers, Masood, would tell you that you should write for an hour a day every morning. Anybody who knows me knows that's not how I do anything. So it was kind of, I did write, I didn't write every day, but I did write for several days every week. But I was enjoying it. So there were periods where I did it a little bit more intensively. Paul and I took ourselves off to a campsite where you could have a built-in tent thing next to your camper van for a week while Thomas was on a school trip, and I sat and wrote quite a lot of it in there. So yeah, it was kind of fits and starts inevitably, but it was for me, it was pretty consistent.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so moving away, one of the things you've sort of alluded to already and sort of talked a little bit about is just this role of shame, and it's a real problem, isn't it, in BFRBs, which is why in clinical services we don't see people who are not presenting because of that barrier of a lack of understanding, and when they do present, often the experience actually is really horrible for people, and we know that. But I'd love you to talk a little bit about the role of shame, and we've obviously done a bit of research on it as well. So it'd be great to hear about that.
So I guess where the story about shame started from with for me is doing the work that meant that I realised just how much shame I carried, and I should say that I didn't even know that at the beginning of the process. There was work to do to realise just how much shame there was associated with these behaviours. But then once I tuned into it, then there was the serious work to do to get the help that you need to be able to move through and past that shame. But then the really amazing thing to me was just once the shame was under control or understood and being dealt with, my curiosity just sort of burst onto the scene, and it was only then in retrospect that I was able to see just what an incredible blanket the shame was over my, if I was thinking or talking about any other aspect of the human brain or the human condition, my natural curiosity would be doing its thing. And yet this thing that I was deeply ashamed about, I had no access to thinking about it in that way, because shame was such a powerful emotion. So as soon as I went to thinking about hair pulling, all I could feel was the shame. None of the curiosity was there. And so it literally wasn't possible for me to start the journey until the shame was out of the way. And in our very first conversation was about shame. And I can remember us, me talking about it and me saying, I think it's a really important contributor or important component of living with this disorder. And I remember that really piqued your curiosity, and you saying, shame isn't something we think about that much when we formulate things for children, young people, and so that was really what got us into a role. And so the first thing we needed to do was find out whether it was just me. Yeah. So we had to ask a whole bunch of other people whether that resonated with them. And my goodness, has the signal been
very
loud? Very much not just me.
Yeah.
And then the next thing we needed to do was find out how young people today experience that, because of course it's a long time since I was a young person. These behaviours generally get going when you're in adolescence. Adolescence, of course, is a super key time for, it's when we're developing our identity, it's when shame really gets hold of you. Yeah. And so understanding how it's experienced for young people close to the onset of their pick and pulling biting behaviours was the next critical thing, and that's what Laura's project was all about. And seeing how, so Laura had conversations with a whole range of young people and was able to put that together in a way that helps us understand what this phenomenon is. Yeah. And it's really only through doing that piece of work that I kind of go, now I know why it was so hard to talk about, because it's really complicated. There's a lot of layers to it, there's lots of components to it, and so it's sort of, we're just sort of figuring out where we take that next, aren't we? But in terms of turning that into the help that people need.
Yeah, and it sort of explains why often, when people might present for help, they often present for something else, and it's only when you're 10 sessions in and you feel safe enough to talk about, with your therapist about various things, that then this suddenly comes up, because it's not the first thing you come and talk about. And Laura's paper was just so, so clearly illustrated that, didn't it? Talking to a therapist that doesn't know how to pronounce it, is Googling it, literally no idea what to do. So, we've got some work to do on that, haven't we? And so, I guess you talked about this a little bit, but what are your thoughts about how you do counteract that shame, and what's been helpful for you?
Well, in the book are my 5 C's, and so these are the things that I have found along the way. So when I started writing the book, I was sort of really conscious that I didn't want to write a self-help book, and that's because I'm a scientist and I would want to test things before recommending them. But inevitably, as you learn more and you have more conversations and you gather the evidence around you, inevitably there ends up being kind of at least what I lay out as things that have been helpful for me. And so I describe these as my 5 C's. And so the first one we've already talked about is compassion. Compassion is a word that I used to think was a kind of soft and fluffy and insignificant, insubstantial. I used to think of compassion as being insubstantial. I now think of it as a really, really important skill. And it's a muscle that you train and you need to keep practicing, and eventually you get good at it. And even then, sometimes you have to remind yourself. So compassion is kind of number 1 skill. And then once compassion is the real antidote to that shame problem. So once compassion is under your belt, then curiosity is the next thing that I found really helpful. So it's been incredibly helpful to me in terms of my understanding of my BFRBs to just get really curious about them, and instead of those self-critical voices and thoughts, you turn those into I wonder why today, I wonder why this bit of me, I wonder why, all of the interesting ways you can ask yourself the question. So get curious instead of critical. Creativity I found really helpful, and creative, there's all sorts of ways of being creative. Lots of people have all sorts of ways of making something exist that didn't exist before. For me, it's painting. most acts of creativity involve our hands. That means our hands are kept busy, so that it's useful just for that. But I actually think the act of creation also somehow scratches the itch of the BFRB urge more deeply than just keeping your hands busy.
Yeah.
I always get to this one and think, oh God, what's number 4? I know what number 5 is. Number 4 is community. So number 4 is other people, and so finding other people who know exactly how this feels. And my great friends at BFRB UK and Ireland, unfortunately they mostly live in Scotland, so it was a bit far for them to come today. But BFRB UK and Ireland are an amazing organisation who offer support groups for people who are looking for a way to kind of make those very first scary connections. And then the last one is self-care. So it's kind of leaning into the hair and beauty industry and the cosmetics industry and all sorts of things that those people who've known me for a long time would never have believed that I would be on a stage talking about. But actually acts of self-care are really helpful in managing BFRBs. So, you know, nails that don't have bits that are biteable are a really good barrier if you've got a tendency to bite at your nails. So those are the things that
Yeah. So one of the things, just sort of thinking about the cosmetic and beauty industry, I mean, one of the things that's amazing about you, and I love the idea that you just banged this book out, because like trying to bring like all of these strands together, it's, you know, it's really fascinating. But one of the things that's brilliant about you is you're this amazing person at bringing networks of people together. So every time I meet you, you're like, oh, I just spoke to this person the other day, they're a trichologist, and they, you know, or just, so you're constantly like pulling together these fields, which is what's so incredible. But I wonder if you can talk about the different networks that you, or the people that you've met along this journey that come from sort of quite different backgrounds.
Yeah, so, well, some of them are in the room, so I might embarrass people. I guess the first conversations I had with people about BFRBs usually led to, oh, you should have a chat with so-and-so, and you should have a chat with so-and-so, and that just grows and grows and grows. So actually, inevitably, you end up having conversations with people who you never imagined you'd be talking to. So Heidi was one of the first people I spoke to, and Heidi said, you should talk to Vlad. He studies sleep. Like, how is that relevant? Vlad has mice running on wheels, and he measures the brain activity of mice when they're zoned out, when they're in that kind of a proxy trance-like state. And so we have been talking about how we turn that into an experiment, probably an animal experiment and a human experiment. How can we try and capture this phenomenon, which is the trance-like state, which is, Vlad taught me that it's sort of somewhere between being awake and being asleep. It's kind of these zones of how, a state of consciousness, which is not quite awake and not quite asleep, that we all experience, but we're not necessarily quite aware of them and how they work. But the sort of, so that's all still fundamentally neuroscience, but they're sort of completely left field networks of people that I've been able to connect with that I knew nothing about before are the skin scientists, the skin and hair scientists. So I've learned, and this is some of the most amazing stuff. So our skin, the connection between our skin and our brain is actually totally fascinating. I knew nothing about this and I'd have gone, what? If I'd heard it a few years ago. But of course our skin is fundamentally an emotion signalling system. So all of our emotions show up on our skin. When we're embarrassed, we blush. When we're angry, our hair stands on end. You can think of crying, or the way that our facial expressions are somehow or another. That's our skin signalling our emotion. And when you think about it, our skin has been signalling our emotions to each other for longer in evolutionary history than we've had voices to tell each other our emotions. And so the link between the skin and the emotion is hardwired and doesn't go through any decision-making processes. And then people who have skin or hair conditions like psoriasis or alopecia or eczema, anybody who has any of those conditions knows that those conditions are far worse if they're stressed. So we already know, and actually for those conditions, we already know that there's the unpicking of the relationship between emotions and the inflammatory response of the immune system is being mapped out in a way that's giving rise to new treatment targets for those sorts of conditions. And I think the BFRBs are just another step on from that. So if you think about your eczema flaring up because you're stressed, well, For some of us, that shows up as an urge to pick, pull or bite, and so you get a kind of mechanical response to it instead of a skin flare-up response to it. And I mean, there's so much more that we don't know, but there's lots of good conversations still to have.
So thinking about sort of people who experience BFRBs, and particularly the people around them, families, friends, I'm sure you get lots of people getting in touch with you wanting to know how best to support, and we've got lots of examples about how not to support, haven't we?
We have.
But what would you advise families, friends, in terms of how you think they should support people with BFRBs?
So I do get a lot of questions from parents, and the first thing that I always notice about these messages is that people are desperate. People are really desperate for help. They're really worried about their young person or their loved one, and have no idea. There's no good information out there about how to help. As I said, similar to not really wanting to write a self-help book, I don't want to claim that I'm an expert in knowing how to parent around BFRBs, because actually there's still quite a lot of work that we're already planning to do to think that through. But nevertheless, I can't leave people without anything to go home with. So the way that I talk to parents is to say, first of all, your distress is real. Your distress, your worry, your maybe even panicky feelings around your child picking or pulling and biting at themselves are because it's scary. So validate those feelings and understand that your distress is very real. However, it's really useful if you can separate out your distress from what your child might be going through, because what's not going to be helpful to your child is trying to manage your distress. And so if you can recognise your own distress and get help for it if you need to, separate from what your child needs, that would be great. I try to find words to say that picking and pulling and biting is normal. We all do it. It is normal grooming behaviour. Actually, that's always the first thing I do, is try to normalise the picking, pulling, biting behaviours. We do it because we're primates. Primates pick and pull and bite at themselves. It is a completely normal thing to do. And over-grooming is something that we find in the animal kingdom. So distressed animals sometimes over-groom. So the picking and pulling and the biting is always the target of the parent's attention. The question is almost always, how can I get my child to stop picking, pulling, biting? And I try to find words to sort of try to shift that narrative for them a little bit into, well, picking and pulling, biting might be some kind of distress behaviour, but actually the much bigger danger for your child is acquiring chronic shame. So actually, if you make the target of your intervention them not being shamed, living in shame, then that already creates quite a different dynamic for people. And then the last thing that I always say is, if you possibly can, recognise that shame is what your child may well be experiencing, and then try to get alongside them. So they know you don't want them to pick and pull and bite. They know they don't want to be picking and pulling and biting. They don't know how not to. And so the best thing you can do is ask. Ask the child, doesn't matter how old they are, well, maybe beyond the age of 2. But if they're picking, pulling, biting, ask them, if you would like to stop, is there anything you can think of that I can do to help you stop? And to try and become an ally, try and get alongside the problem rather than being the picking, pulling, biting police, because that just never goes well, and all it does is set up this I should be able to do something that I can't do feeling, which is actually worse than picking, pulling, biting.
Yeah, I love that advice. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question and then I'm going to let other people ask questions. So my final question, I guess, is what kind of, having got to this point, what kind of gives you hope for the future?
You do. You do, and the others of you. The conversations that I have that lead people to go, that's interesting, and then they go off and they think about it, and they're off and running, and it becomes a normal part of the conversation. I suppose what I really hope for is that as these ideas take hold, as they percolate, as they grow, we recognise picking, pulling, biting as being a really important aspect of human suffering that's just missing from our vocabulary. It's missing from the training that people get. It's missing from our understanding of the human condition. it's actually really basic. It's a really basic aspect of the human condition that just needs to be, you know, we need to work our way through the persuading and the awareness raising aspects of that. But mostly what I find is that once the awareness is raised, people are like, yeah, well, okay, so what do we need to do next? And so it's kind of, it's that every conversation leads to another conversation. And now I find myself in rooms where other people are bringing up BFRBs. I don't have to be the one bringing them up, because you and Kathy and lots of others are always bringing them up. And I'm like, oh, we're talking about BFRBs in the room. And that's, so that's what gives me hope, is that it cascades, it ripples, and all of those students doing those projects, they'll go on and do whatever they're doing, and wherever they go, that'll be part of their journeys. And so, yeah, just ripples.
Wow, what a magical thing you've started. You have been the engine to all of this amazing, you know, all these amazing things going on. Right, I'm going to stop talking and let other people ask some questions. So does anyone have a question? Yes.
I work and live with autistic people. Just wondering what your experience has been on your journey with neurodivergence and all that. 6 months old.
Yeah, great, thank you. So neurodivergence has been another huge surprise for me on this journey. So when I started out, I had no notion that there was such a big overlap between BFRBs and neurodivergence. What I found fairly quickly is that people with autism, actually first people with ADHD, I don't know whether Ali's made it, I've not seen Ali. When I first did my kind of coming out blog, one of the first people who sent me an email was a colleague who, she's in the book, and she said, she's a neurologist and she's got a particular interest in ADHD, and she said, all my patients have BFRBs, and I'm like, what? So she sort of noticed that, not necessarily sort of pathological level, picking and pulling, biting, but can't sit still, you know, there's a foot going, or there's hair twirling, whatever it might be, it's really common. Obviously in autism, stereotype behaviours is kind of part of the whole picture. I don't think yet that BFRBs are seen as being distinct or a special case, actually. But one of the things that I found is that actually within the neurodivergent communities, there's, first of all, I feel very welcomed. So Andrea has been a big engine for that as well, and bringing me into the neurodivergent voices and all of the stuff that she's been doing. But I sort of felt very quickly that that there's a sense of belonging. There's a sense of belonging that BFRBs are often a symptom or often a co-occurring condition with both autism and ADHD. They're not, the Venn diagrams don't overlap completely, but there's lots of it around. And the last thing I'll say about that is that what I found is acceptance and a new vocabulary, because when you work in psychiatry and psychology, you're kind of conditioned with the vocabulary of disorder, the disorder model and the disorder way of talking about things. And for BFRBs, we're in a bit of a funny stage there, because we want to be taken seriously, and so we want you to think of it as a disorder, but at the same time we want you to recognise that it's just an aspect of being human, so it's just a difference, not a disorder. And so what I found within the neurodivergent spaces that I have found myself in is a sense of kind of, it's almost like there's a sense of, oh yeah, that this is how we should be thinking about it, this is how we should be talking about it. And this is a space where it belongs. There's more. I could say more, but I will then.
Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you so much for the talk. I was just thinking about how you said you speak to a lot of parents and you give out a little bit, or as much advice as you really can. I was wondering what your experiences have been. Maybe with your parents or your family.
Well, they're here, so they may be. I'll go gently. What I will say is that there wasn't just hard to find information when I was a young person with a BFRB. There was literally no information at all available. And so my parents and I, for a good decade and a half, thought it was only me. And that's so common in the world of, I talk to people with BFRBs all the time who thought it was only them, because there was There was no Google, there were no books about it, there was nobody talking, it wasn't even in the DSM, the diagnostic manual yet. And so there was literally no information available, and so my parents did the best they could with what they had, which was, you know, just to use their instincts. And our instincts as parents is to tell our children how to behave. My child's here too. He knows that I've spent, you know, a lot of time telling him what is and is not socially acceptable behaviour. And so, you know, it is our job as parents to impart that information for our children. And the big thing that we know now that we didn't know then is that I knew that I shouldn't be doing it. I just couldn't not. And that's quite hard for my parents to hear now, but they're getting used to it.
There was a question somewhere over here as well, wasn't there? Yes.
So I've noticed across sort of social media and in the book, the peacock feather seems to come up over. Is there any significance?
There is. Thank you, Jess. Yes, peacock feather came about because of another kind of aspect of the science of the human condition, I suppose, that I learned about along the way, which is about identity. And so our hair and our skin and our nails, even though lots of us like to pretend it doesn't matter, it's not important, we're not make-uppy people, we're not we're not cosmetic-y people. Actually, our hair and our skin and our nails are a massive part of our identity. And if they're not what they should be, should in inverted commas, then we kind of feel it as an ick that it's kind of difficult to describe, but I think we probably all know that feeling. We all know the feeling of a bad hair day or just not looking the way we feel we're supposed to look. And so when I was describing that phenomenon to somebody, I used the metaphor of the peacock feathers. It's like, so our hair and our skin and our nails are our peacock feathers. They are the way we show the world who we are. And so I said that to somebody who then put it on a picture of something they were writing about me, and I kind of went, that's perfect. So it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. It's hairy. And so you can kind of imagine the temptation to pull off those hairs. It's incredibly beautiful. It's a bit hairy. It's a bit scruffy, but also beautiful. And so, and then when I looked up the kind of symbolism of it, there was tons of great symbolism. Lots of different kind of traditions have symbolism like pride and beauty, and lots of good words in relation to the peacock feather. So once I found it, it was like, okay, that's mine. Thank you.
Other questions?
Can I ask one? You said that you've got another book brewing. Ask a little bit.
I've only got a title. I genuinely have no idea what I would write about next. I just know that it just feels like that's the set would be.
Yeah.
I'll come to you first and then you. Yeah.
I'm wondering what kind of moment led you to be feeling empowered enough to talk about it publicly beyond your discuss.
So it's not one thing. It's a whole series of things that come together to make that moment. But I actually kind of hit the wall. I was a busy academic career and taken on far too many things. COVID, menopause, homeschooling, all of those things coincided for me in sort of 2021, 22-ish. And I realised that I wasn't enjoying my job as much as I used to. I've always enjoyed my job, and I wasn't enjoying it anymore. So I decided I needed to take some time out, press the reset button and see where that took me. And so I did that. I spent the summer hanging out with my then 9-year-old, now he's enormous, and just thought really carefully about what I wanted to do next. I had some help, and Izzy, who's sitting behind you, helped me think through. If anybody ever finds themselves kind of in that position, I highly recommend seeking out a good coach to help you think that through, that transition. So I knew I was in a transition, but I didn't know where I was transitioning to. The process of deciding to do it was about realising. So I really got to the point where I thought I might just quit this. I might go and do something else. I'm going to do something completely different in my life. And I was thinking, I literally had a written list of pros and cons about what I wanted to do next. And the biggest pro, under the pros and cons, the biggest pro of an academic career is freedom. And actually, we don't necessarily always feel it because we get so busy doing so many things that we don't necessarily feel free. But actually, we have an incredible opportunity to just get curious about something and follow your nose down that way. And so that put together with thinking, I was thinking about the idea of quitting and no longer being an Oxford professor and thinking, actually, I'm totally fine with that. I don't need that bit of my identity. And something about that made me go, but hang on, that might be a useful thing. I wonder what I can use that for. Seriously, it's like, that's a platform, that's a thing that we can use to do something with. So as soon as I sort of detached myself from it being something about me, I started realising that your doors open when you can say Oxford professor. I mean, I still kind of go, well, whatever, when it's about me, but actually it's a thing you can do something with. And then obviously I've been carrying around living with the thing for 40 years, and I thought, well, look, maybe with that I can do this, and if I do that, maybe other people will feel able to as well. So it was, lots of little steps.
Yes, I think you had a question.
It's really going back to the question before about the peacock feather, because Clare is so positive, so creative in her thinking, and found in lockdown and other situations painting helped so much. But I was interested because the start of the talk was about shame and the other side of it all. But when you described the peacock feather, it was only beauty and positive things. And in fact, the peacock feather is the evil eye. It has a lot of badness in lots of cultures. And I was just interested that actually the peacock feather is perfect symbol for the subject.
The yin and the yang, the good and the bad, yeah. Well, anybody who has a hair pulling disorder would look at this and think, well, that one needs tidying up, that one needs tidying up, and that one can do with being a bit shorter. Yeah, thank you. It's that's right.
Other questions?
Not a question, actually just an observation. So I've been a friend of Claire's for many years, and I'm also a clinical psychologist, so I want to just actually offer an observation, which is that I am so immensely proud of Clare for having achieved something really quite extraordinary, which is to make herself incredibly vulnerable by telling us about her story, which, you know, those who love her and who are close to her have known for many years, but to also look at it from a really professional angle. And, you know, reading your book, it was just amazing, the scientific rigour you put into it in terms of really investigating BFRBs at the same time as putting your own suffering into it. And I just felt so touched by that. As one of your closest friends, and I just wanted to applaud that.
So just to say, for those of you from a more sort of academic interest point, we've got a conference coming up later this year, haven't we? We should probably mention.
We should. The 8th to the 10th of October is the second Oxford BFRB conference, BFRB Con. This time it is funded by a skin charity, so this is, I'm particularly proud of that fact because we are getting dermatology and dermatologists and the skin industry and charities to kind of go, this looks interesting, and to give us some money to put the conference on. So we will be focusing on this thing called psychodermatology. That's the link that I told you about, the link between hair and skin, as a bit of a focus, but because it's us, it's me, it'll have the breadth in it that you've heard about today, and we'll be exploring all sorts of aspects of the phenomenon of picking, pulling, biting.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of lived experience, activities and involvement, and
So very importantly, so there's a day and a half of sort of the conference itself, but we'll do exactly what we did last time, which is to make that as accessible as possible. So it's open to the community, to members of the public, as well as to scientists. And then on the last day, on the Saturday, we'll have a full-on community day. So creating safe spaces and activities and opportunities for education and connection for people with BFRBs, and that bit will be led, as it was last time, by BFRB UK and Ireland.
Yeah.
They do an amazing job at creating that safe space, and so yeah, we're a great team.
yeah, we're looking forward to that, aren't we? Okay, so just before we make our way downstairs for drinks and nibbles and book signing, Karen, over to you, because we just wanted to get you a little something to say how proud we are.
Oh, there's some peacock feathers
In there.
Oh, there really are. Amazing. How'd you manage that?
And you also mentioned BFRB UK and Ireland, and they were so sorry to be here, and they have sent you this because they wanted to send
so
you all their
nice.
love.
Oh, that's so
Yeah,
nice.
okay.
Thank you, Bridget. Thank you.
Great, so let's, a big round of applause.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you for coming, and do join us downstairs.
Thank you, Polly. Thank you, Polly. and thank you, Karen. And to Jess for photography. And right.